we have a lot of successes, Erik, between us. But what you and I both know is that what we really bring to the table are the failures.
Hi, it's Erik Weir, and welcome today to another episode of Stuttering Your Way to Success. Today, I'm with a great friend of mine, Bill Reeves. Bill Reeves and I have done so much together. We've owned a company together. We've executive produced film together, and he's moved on to bigger, better things. He's running a massive corporation now, or a nonprofit. I want to learn all about that. I've learned so much from him on strategies, watching him go from managing a small team to a very large team. Watch them interact with celebrities, captains of industry, and talk about being around change. Wow, Bill, you've seen so much change with media and entertainment, the theaters, COVID-19. I mean, managing through all that had to be just epic. So Bill, tell me a little bit about Bill Reeves.
Bill Reeves, Erik, great to be with you today. I echo those sentiments. Not only was it a privilege to be in business with you for many years, but I treasure my friendship with you. So thanks for having me on today, and excited about what you're doing with this podcast. So Bill Reeves, I live in the great state of Tennessee, in the booming town of Nashville. Good luck buying a house here these days.
Yeah.
And very difficult. I am married to my college sweetheart, Heidi. We've been married almost 30 years and have 3 children, 25, 23, and 17. And we have 2 grandchildren, 13 and 1. So our life is a lot of fun. I've been in the entertainment business my whole career. Started when I was 18 in college, working on my marketing degree, and started in the music business, and that led me into film and home entertainment, and obviously crossed paths with you through that journey. And you and I ran a business together for many years that we then sold, and we still interact with each other a lot. I know that, but I look forward to more and more opportunities with you down the road.
Great. I have one thing to say. Veggie Tales. Tell me about Veggie Tales. My word, you were involved in Veggie Tales. I mean, I've never thought I could watch a show on vegetables. I'm like, they're crushing it. They're crushing it. You know, tell me about Veggie Tales.
Veggie Tale. You know what? It's so funny, Erik. I mean, I've had a lot of really great opportunity through the years in publishing and music and film. And I mean, God's blessed me with a lot of great opportunity. But every time somebody finds out I work for Veggie Tales, that is all they want to talk about.
I know, you're typecast.
It is the funniest thing. Typecast. That's right. Yes, it is true. I worked for a tomato and a cucumber for 3 years. And I joined them in around 2000 when Veggie Tales was about 7 or 8 years old. At that point, I had been working for their distributor, which was Word Records. And I got to know Phil just a little bit, and I really loved the vision of what they were trying to do. I love, and we could talk about this a lot. I could do a podcast on this, but at the end of the day, a lot of Christian products only reach Christians. And while I believe in nourishing and feeding the body of Christ, I also believe that the world needs to hear the good news of the gospel. And Veggie Tales was taking it out to the mainstream world in a way that I'd never seen. And so
Right.
I was fortunate to join. I had 3 roles there. I started in consumer products. I was working with Fisher-Price Toys and Haddad Apparel and Hallmark Cards and a lot of the Christian-based companies that were making products like shirts and ties. And did that for probably a year and a half, all while second job being a small part at that time of the marketing team for their very first movie, Jonah, a Veggie Tales movie. That, Erik, as you know, your resume in the film business are your screen credits. And that was my very first screen credit. I'm listed in that movie on the marketing team. And boy, I just saw the power of film through that. And then the last thing I did there was ran their Christian retail business back when there were thousands of Christian retail stores. I was in charge of managing those relationships. So loved Veggie Tales. I still have a really close relationship with Phil Vischer, the creator, and Bob the Tomato. and Mike Naraki, who was Larry the Cucumber. Those guys are still friends, and I still work with them from time to time.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, do this for me also. 2019, what a crazy, crazy time. COVID. How did that impact you? I mean, there's so many questions about ministry. Did giving go down? Did giving go up? Did impact? How did you help people? How did you bring people together? I mean, tell me. I mean, you're running K-Love, massive nonprofit of outreach. I mean, tell me what you do today a little bit, and how did COVID did it impact you in the ministry?
Yeah, boy, that is a great topic, because I think for me, one of the things I've spent my life doing is trying to tell people about God's faithfulness. And I got to live it on the front row through COVID running this organization. So as you know, and we can explain to your viewers, you and I owned a business called WTA, Working Title Agency. And we were in the film finance business. We marketed and distributed films, helped them get made. We also had a book publishing, book agency business that we helped authors and filmmakers get their products out. In late 2019, Educational Media Foundation, which is the parent nonprofit of K-Love and Air One Radio Networks, acquired WTA and brought me over to be the CEO and also a board member. And little did we know, Erik, that what we believe to be a marriage of two great teams, so that the sum of the parts would be greater than the individual parts to reach people for Christ, turned into an organization that was trying to change from radio only, K-Love and Air One, into multimedia. And oh, by the way, let's drop a pandemic right on the top of that. Growth season. Now, as you point out, we are a nonprofit, so we're donor supported, just like NPR or PBS. We a couple times a year, we go on the radio and we raise money for our operations for the next year. To your question, how did it affect us? The downside is culturally, it creates a lot of problems. We have right at 500 employees. And when you have that many employees who are scared, just like everyone else, unsure, you're working from home, you're not in the office with people to collaborate, it creates challenges. And I know you faced that as well as you were navigating those waters at WCN.
Oh, sure.
But it was really challenging. And yet at the same time, when we go out to donors and say, okay, and in fact, before I tell you that story, I'll say our pledge drive in early 2020 was scheduled in April. We delayed it because we knew people were hurting and we didn't feel like it was the right time to ask for money. We took a big step of faith. We did the pledge drive in the summer, and the donors showed up in a big way, Erik. I mean, the last 2.5 years, we have been on or ahead of budget. And it's because we just have incredibly faithful listeners and donors who've been really good. And we've just seen God's faithfulness to keep this ministry going, even through these really difficult economic times.
Wow. If you could go back, say 20 years, more than that, could go back to Bill, who's 20-year-old Bill, what would you tell yourself?
Oh, man. I guess I have to be honest here, right, Erik?
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of things that come to mind. When I grew up in a Christian home in the South, and you're taught the Bible from the time you're young, and in my home, and I'm so grateful for that. One of the things, though, that I discovered later in life that I wish I would have known at 20 as clearly as I do today is that we're all wired to do something. I believe Scripture teaches God made us and He wired us a certain way. He gave us gifts. And the success in life isn't, making a lot of money and having all that success. Success in life is finding out what God's wired you to do and pursuing that. If you're living in your giftings, it's the old adage, Erik. You and I probably said it to each other. If you find something you love to do, you'll never work a day in your life.
It's true.
I think there are biblical principles behind that. And I encourage, especially young business leaders, hey, lot of times you get pressured into a job because you need a paycheck or you need to pay off that college debt. Don't think about that. Steer towards where your giftings are. I think about your son, Erik Matthew. That guy is such a great filmmaker, and he's got such an eye for it. And I saw it from the minute I met him, and he was just shooting videos around your house. That's you want to encourage Matthew to go that path, and you've done that. And so that's important to me. The other thing that's really important to me that I would tell 20-year-old self, there are a million things that will get in the way of, number one, your faith life, and number two, your family life. And you've got to make sure those two things are prioritized. And that sometimes means walking away from a particular job or giving up something you could do that isn't, let's use Sunday mornings. There's a lot of things that can get in the way of being in church on Sunday mornings.
Sure.
There's a lot of things that can get in the way of date night with your wife or that sports activity with your kids. Erik, I know you spend a lot of time with your kids and
I do,
love on them. And you travel the country to do that, even as they grow into adults. And I'm trying to do the same with mine. So I say keep things out of the way of interrupting your faith life and your family life.
Man, that's powerful. That's powerful. And thanks for sharing that. Have you, I know at this stage in life, you've had just tremendous successes. You're well known in your industry. Has there ever been a time you feel like just throwing in the towel and I'm out of here, I quit, And what is it that made you not do that? And what did you learn?
And that's a great question. The answer is emphatically 100% yes. There have been those times. I remember one time, before I tell you what's kept me from doing it, I remember one time in particular, I had been in the music business for a while, and I was treading water. I was feeling really thinly stretched. And I started thinking about going to work for the Atlanta Braves. I love the Atlanta Braves. So I started looking into doing that. And I'll say the Lord let me. He gave me some breathing room to just sort of dream a little bit and think. But then when I got through all of that, I'll never forget, I just have felt this gentle tug in my heart that said, you can't do that. That's not what I called you to do. That's not what I made you to do.
Yeah.
And I can give you multiple examples of that through the years in my career where I was either burned out or I was frustrated or I'd hit a dead end that I just didn't know how to get past. But this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, which is if you can find that calling in your life, which you really feel like God wired you to do, it makes those decisions a lot easier. If you give me a minute, Erik, one thing I'd love to share is the story of in Proverbs. There's a famous verse that a lot of Christian parents know: train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he won't depart from it.
Right.
Well, I was brought up to believe, even as a young parent, that what that meant was, well, if you take them to church and read them their Bible and teach them how to pray and say their blessing, when they're old, they won't depart from it. But I don't know about you, but I know a lot of pastors' kids who are hellions. And, so, it's kind of a head scratcher, like, they're doing all that. Why are these kids so ridiculously bad? Well, my friend Max Lucado wrote a book a few years ago called Cure for the Common Life. And one of the chapters in the book was about this verse. And he explained that he went back into the old Hebrew language to study that verse, and he discovered something that he had never seen before. And it ties to the question you've asked me. Okay. So he said in Hebrew, they use a lot of word pictures, and the word picture in that verse is a bow and arrow. And he said it says, when you train up a child, the word picture is that they're a bow that has a bent to it. And, if you think about a bow, depending on how you pull that back and, the bent of that bow determines the direction of that arrow, right?
Right.
And so what he's saying is that your job as a parent is to discover what the bent of your child is. It's not to write your child's story. It's to help your child read the story God's already written for their life.
Right.
If you help that child find their bent, then when they're old, they won't depart from it. They'll be on the path that they were made to be on. And so for me, Erik, the answer to your question is in that analogy is, and in that verse, I really believe I found a bent in life. I feel like I found what God wired me to do. So when I have those days that I just don't want to push through and I don't want to do anymore, I go back to, I know what I was made to do. I know what the bent is in my life. I know what God's gifted me. And maybe more importantly, and you know this, I know what he hasn't wired me to do, right? I know what I'm not good at, and I got to stay away from that, right?
Right.
So I think that's what helps get me through those times.
Great. And I've got to know you over the years. I know that your father was a very important person in your life, and I know you looked up to him a lot. Would you share a little about like who was your dad and how did he impact your life? Then how did the way he how you loved him and how you spent time together, how did that influence you?
I appreciate you asking that. My dad, his name was David Reeves. Unfortunately, my dad died during COVID. And so he's been gone now for about a year and a half in heaven. And my dad was the common phrase that was said about my dad was he was a good man. Mm. And my dad, when he died, there were so many people that approached our family that said, my dad would come down and mow my grass. Your dad would come over and bring us a meal. Mm. Your dad would come by my house and get a cat out of a tree. Mm-hmm. Your dad worked on my lawnmower to get it running again. My dad impacted so many people in everyday life. And he taught me that. And he taught me how to treat people. He gave me two pieces of advice, one spiritual and one from the business world. And he wasn't a man of many words, but here were the two pieces of advice. In the work world, I'll start there first. He said, and you've heard this before, always be careful how you treat people going up the ladder, because you will pass every single one of them coming back down. That's right. And it really helped me as I began to get into management and began to steer people. It was those words from him that helped me remember how important it is to treat people well. On the spiritual side, I think outside of signing a birthday card each year, my dad never wrote anything to me, anything, no letters, nothing. But one thing he wrote to me that I treasure was he gave me a Bible when I was 10 years old, and he opened up the front cover and he wrote, "Never compromise this book. Love, Dad." That's all he ever wrote. 4 words. Wow. And I watched my dad live that. I watched him, I think it was St. Aquinas that said, "In all things share Christ, when necessary, use words." That was my dad. My dad lived it. He wasn't the guy that was going to sit down and hand out a 4 spiritual laws track. He wasn't going to strike up a conversation with the guy on the airplane about Jesus. But he was a good man, and in every sense of the word. And that those moments with him helped steer me to be the man I am today.
Wow.
Good and bad.
That's great. What are you learning now? I mean, do you read books, meeting people, study? What are you learning now?
Yeah. Learning now. Let me start with life's hacks and life's potholes teach me more than anything I can read in a book. Yeah. I think you would say the way you work with your clients in wealth management and the way I work in the entertainment business is we have a lot of successes, Erik, between us. But what you and I both know is that what we really bring to the table are the failures, the things where you stepped in a financial pothole you don't want a client to step in. I've made a bad movie deal that I don't want that next filmmaker to make. That's where the real value is. How I learn is just continuing to be willing to admit that I'm still making mistakes as I go. But there was a great book called Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull, who co-founded Pixar with Steve Jobs. They built this culture at Pixar of fail fast and fail forward. If you're not failing, you're not developing, you're not growing.
Mhm.
So I get a lot of life's lessons out of that. Now I do read. I'm not an avid reader. When I get what little spare time I get, I usually have my headphones on and I'm listening to music, um, or I'm watching content, because obviously I make my living in the film and the entertainment space. But I try to make myself read a few books a year. They are typically instructional books. Probably the last one that I finished the full book of was Virgin Atlantic, Richard Branson's autobiography. I listened to that in an audio book, and
Mhm.
just get inspired by people who have had success. And what I
Sure.
loved about Richard was his willingness to say, well, that was a dumb idea and I lost
Right.
$500 million on that.
Yeah.
I appreciate people who are vulnerable because it helps me learn.
Sure. Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Good. So what would you like to be remembered for?
What would I like to be remembered for? Well, Erik, I think I certainly don't want to be trite and just the same thing that everybody says, but Erik, I want to be married to the same woman I married when I got started. I want my kids to love me and respect me, and I want to have a relationship with them. I want people to know that there's a Mark Hall of Casting Crowns wrote a song that basically says, I don't care if anybody remembers me. I want them to remember Jesus. That's who I'm trying to point people to. And I'll never forget one time. I'll never forget this. You and I were working together, and I had to make a trip to LA to meet with a quite famous television producer. I won't say his name because people probably will know who he is. And I was sitting in his office, and he's very successful. And your listeners would know his television shows and his streaming shows. And at one point in there, we were talking about wealth and heritage and legacy. And I made the statement that many of us, I know you've heard, I've never seen a U-Haul behind a hearse.
That's right. That's right.
And he kind of, listened to it. And then about 2 minutes later in the conversation, he said, hey, can we go back to something you said? And I said, yeah, sure. What was that? He goes, I've never heard that phrase. I've never seen a U-Haul behind a hearse. He goes, can I go write that down? I need to leave this meeting and go back to my desk and write that down. He said, that really impacted me. I think so much of the world, Erik, spends its time chasing things that are just empty and they're not invaluable. I mean, you've seen the value of having wealth put to work for the kingdom. It's impactful. It's
very powerful.
There's nothing bad about it. It's a useful tool. But I think there's a reason that you and I partnered so well on things that had more of soulful and eternal impact rather than just temporary impact. So when you say, what do you want to be remembered for? Hopefully people can track my efforts, both with my family and with my career, back to pointing people to things that really matter, not empty, non-eternal things.
Yeah, it's so true. And my seat, I mentioned this in the book that I wrote, Who's Eating Your Pie? And thank you for being one of the people who wrote about it. Is I've been around some very wealthy people, some of the wealthiest people in the world. And I've seen sometimes they make decisions in pursuit of wealth that sacrifice relationship, and sometimes sacrifices their personal their health. Over time, at the end of their life, I've never heard them say, "Hey, I wish I'd had more money." They're always they're thinking about the relationships in life, and they're thinking about maybe their health or what they're dealing with. But that's really good, and finding balance. And you mentioned date night with your wife and taking time for your kids and family. How do you find balance today? What does life look like you? What does life look like for you? And how do you find balance?
Well, that's a weak spot for me. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. I would say I'm a lot better at it. I actually just got asked this exact question for a radio interview I did recently. in the Christian radio space. I got asked, how do you find balance? And my response was, you probably ought to ask my wife that instead of me. You know Heidi, she can be very direct with me when that gets out of balance. And I'm grateful for that. I think there's a couple of tools that Heidi and I use to try to help. But I will admit that I'm not very good at it because I love what I do and it's easy to overcommit, and the calendar's just crazy. But here's a couple of things we do. I've already mentioned date night. I do that. One thing that I've done since my oldest was old enough to travel with me was all three of my kids have traveled with me. And that was one of the things that connected you and I. Your kids have traveled with you a great deal. In fact, our kids have traveled together.
That's right. That's right.
So I always wanted my kids to be a part of my life, not just reading about life in a textbook in a classroom. I wanted them to experience life. That gave me some balance because I was able to, even though I was gone a lot, to have them with me gave me balance. Heidi and I's date nights that I mentioned. The other thing that we do, our family started several years ago, and I would say it was one of the biggest changes that we had to make in our life, and I'm so glad we did it, was we began to honor the Sabbath. And we began to take, we follow more the Jewish tradition of sunset on Saturday night to sunset on Sunday night. We do know what Scripture says is common work, meaning we're not Pharisees that don't lift a finger to, put a clean, fix food for ourselves. But I don't do any Caleb work in that 24-hour period. And Heidi tries to take a break from her normal duties as well. And we sleep and we watch football and we spend time with each other, and we go to state parks and walk. Whatever we can do, just take our mind off and do that. And it works really well because I can still get stuff done on Saturdays. And after I get past sunset on Sunday night, if I got to prep for the week, I can do that. But I get a really good season of, just frankly, Eric, doing what I feel like God tells us to do. And it's so funny when you do that, how well it works. Yeah. So imagine that.
That's right.
So for me, those are some of the things that I do to find some balance. But most of the time, I'd probably still admit I'm still out of balance. And I feel the effects of that sometimes, from strain on my family to health issues. I mean, I've not mastered that, but I do work on it diligently.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And Bill, you've always been, a person who tries to look forward and see trends and things that are happening. And I know that's part of what you do is when you run a large or major organization. What do you see as the future of entertainment? I mean, where is it going? And I know people were talking, but what's happening? I mean, theaters were shuttered, then they're open and on demand and radio, and what is going on?
It's a little crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Aren't you glad you don't own stock in a theater right now? I mean, really, it's crazy. So there's several things that I look out and see and would say, if I could predict it with certainty, I wouldn't. I'd probably be sitting on a beach somewhere, watching the waves crash over my toes. But Eric, what I really believe is that our culture is going to reach a point in the next few years where it's going to realize how bad our entertainment systems are right now. Okay, and what do I mean by that? You've got girls killing themselves because they don't get enough likes on social media. You've got guys who are confused about who they are because they can't put a screen down to save their life. You've got addictions to pornography because it's available on every device that is in your home, unfiltered. You got and even if you're watching what I'd call good content, people are watching so much of it, it's taking away. They're not going outside and getting in the sun. They don't have hobbies. And so for us, what we're trying to do at EMF is we do believe in being in those spaces, but we believe in having balance, creating balance. We feel like as a vendor of those things, we have a responsibility. So what do I mean by that? When we're developing streaming, like we have Caleb on Demand, we're not trying to create Christian Netflix where it's just so much content you could never digest it all. And my goal is to keep you in front of your screen, constantly watching me 24/7. I feel like there's a responsibility for these product creators to be limiting. Like, you know what? We want you to have good content to watch, but we're not probably going to create more than 2 to 4 hours of new content a week. Because what we'd rather you be doing is reading a book or having dinner with your spouse or be at church with your youth group. And so I feel like, and we're already starting to see it, Erik, when you watch stock prices of Netflix and you're watching some of these things happen, these households are starting to figure out that what started out as, oh, this is fun, this is entertainment, has really become a dangerous tool in their hand or, on the screen. So I think you'll see a shift in the type of content. I think you'll see the shift in how these streaming services are built. And I really do believe that we're going to get back to what Jesus was so good at, which is just basic storytelling. You can't keep making $300 million Spider-Man movies and expect the world to keep showing up to them. At some point, you just got to be able to tell great stories. And I think that's what we're headed towards.
And I have maybe one or two more questions, but one of the things I've heard frequently, particularly when we were partners at WTA, is I've got a script. I've got an idea. So what would you tell somebody who's young that says, man, I got a passion for filmmaking. I got a passion as a director. I've written a screenplay. I've done this. And what would you say? Because I mean, it's everything from like, you see people, they've got talent and people are like, oh my word, this is really bad. But what would you tell somebody? What would you tell somebody if they say, how do I get started? Or how do I find a mentor? Or, what would you say?
Yep. It's a common issue that comes up. You and I both know. I mean, how many times? Oh my gosh. I'll never forget somebody. I was on a vacation once in Sarasota in a retirement community, and one of the ladies found out that I was in film. And over the next 3 days, every senior citizen in that community brought me their script and their headshots, and it was the funniest thing. My family and I still laugh about it. What I would say is a couple of things. Number one, be patient. Number two, creatives have a lot of trouble hearing criticism, but build a tough shell and be willing to accept it because it will make you better as a creative. Number two, or number three, I really do believe there's a place for things like film school, and there's music business programs, music programs like at Belmont here and Lipscomb University here in Nashville. There is education, but I will tell you that the people that I've seen really traverse through the ranks are the people who are willing to go out and schlep cables and set up lights and just get on a working movie set and start learning it. There's a great line in Christmas Vacation where Cousin Eddie is being talked about, and Clark and his wife are talking about him that he hasn't had a job in 10 years.
Right.
And she says, well, he's holding out for a management position.
Yeah.
There's a lot of filmmakers who think their first thing they're going to do is direct a film or produce a film. That's not how it works. You and I didn't learn the business that way. We got in, we started with small movies. We started dealing in things we didn't even really know about sometimes, but we got in there and figured it out. I really encourage people to try to get as much hands-on experience as they can. And I've seen that work really well for people through the years. but back to what I said earlier, you got to have a passion for it. You got to be gifted, and listen to those who are telling you how you can get better in your craft.
Out of the park. That's a great answer because it's so true. It really is the same thing you can tell people in any industry, but film, unlike anything else, seems to be dislocated from people thinking there's steps to take. I've got to earn it. I've got to work my way up. I've got to build credibility to network. I need to put in the energy. I need to learn. I need to be disciplined. I need to study. And it's so, and so you really, that's fantastic advice on that. What do you do to give back? We've talked about other hosts. Sometimes we face depression, and depression is very powerful. And then if you have depression, when you introduce gratitude, depression tends to go away. How do you give back today? How do you pay it forward in your seat now that you're where you are? And of course, there's times of life where not that you can do it every day, you're busy, or not that maybe it's. But how do you try to give? How do you try to prepare the next generation, or give back to people who are less fortunate than you or your family or my family or other people that you've met?
Yeah. Well, there's several ways. Number one, just from a mentoring standpoint, I have a real heart and a passion for people that are coming up through the business world. And anytime I get a chance to go and talk to someone individually or as a group, I try to do that. Not because I got it all figured out, Erik, but because I've had some successes and I've had a lot of failures. And I think both those are valuable to learn from. And I want to share that. I think the transfer of wisdom from one generation to the next is a forgotten art, because we take our seniors and we shove them away. We let them go from our companies. We put them in old people's homes, and never did the old generation meet with the new. And that's why we have a lot of the problems we do in the world today. And so, back in the day, grandma was on the back 40, and, grandma and ma and daughter all lived life together, and life's wisdom's transferred across the generations. So for me, it's very, it's very tactical in that regard. Now, Erik, one thing Heidi and I do as well is, we don't talk about it a lot, but we do financially set aside resources. We've been involved with a home church for many years. Because of that, we're not in a church that we can just give. And so we set aside resources, and we look for needs. Maybe somebody needs a light bill paid, or maybe somebody needs a new set of clothes, or, maybe somebody just needs to go out and eat and have dinner and have a meal. And we try to use our resources to pour into people that way, because we feel like it gives us a personal touch with them. It's not just a cold transactional, I wrote my check, stuck it in the offering plate. Right. It keeps us sensitive to those around us and the needs around us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. I really appreciated being on our show today. Thank you for being on Stuttering Your Way to Success. I appreciate it. I guess it was Bill Reeves. Bill, as always, I learned so much from you. I appreciate your heart to give back, to lead, to mentor the next generation, and to live in such a way that that you influence others positively and you make an impact. And to all of our guests, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you learned something, as I always do. And the purpose of this show is to help you to give you tools you can use right away to make a massive change in your life.